The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's Rev-Trac webinar, Back to Basics, 5 Types of SAP Change. I need to start sharing my screen. Okay. There we are. All right, I'm Dan McGran with Rev-Trac and the Director of Strategic Accounts for the US and UK, and I'll be today's presenter. Happy to be here. For the non-Rev-Trac customers on today's webinar, we wanted to give a brief introduction. Our company is Revelation Software Concepts, and our software solutions for SAP environments are Rev-Trac and Insights. Our current version of Rev-Trac is named Platinum, which is an automated change management solution which helps customers improve their SAP change outcomes, specifically in the areas of velocity, volume, quality, risk reduction, and cost savings. Insights is a new name for our software solution formerly named SALT and is an SAP Change Intelligence solution which is included with Rev-Trac Platinum. We've been helping customers in this area for more than 20 years and have a 100% focus on SAP. One more commercial. We'll be at SAP Tech Ed in Las Vegas the first week of October and are hosting a cocktail reception. If you or your coworkers are attending Tech Ed, please stop by our booth, sign up for our event. You can find more information on the event on our website. So here's our agenda for today. The topic for this webinar came out of a lot of discussions recently we've had with customers, prospects, and some analysts. The discussions keep circling back to the topics of Agile, DevOps, ITSM, and other methodologies or frameworks, and how they all fit together with SAP Change Management. We know they fit together because we have lots of customers who are moving down the Agile and DevOps paths and have been using Rev-Trac for years. That's what this little graphic in the lower corner is, the chart that shows 62% of Rev-Trac customers are meeting their Agile DevOps goals by using Rev-Trac. And of course, we're working with those customers to find out where they're going, more importantly, what they're trying to accomplish, and really how we can help them. We found that a common link between these methodologies and SAP Change Management are the 5 types of SAP changes we're going to discuss today. I think we all know that and can agree that SAP Change Management is a high-risk, high-touch process and requires lots of effort and resources, and that the underlying SAP business processes and architectures differ widely between the different SAP customers. It's certainly safe to say that no 2 SAP customers do things the same way. When we look at our fairly large customer base, we see all types of SAP architectures out there, from the basic development, quality, and production setups to customers with multiple quality systems in place, to more complex N+1 and N+2 environments, and even multi-tiered global template architectures that customers might be using. So with all these unique architectures and business processes in place, it's sort of easy and logical to assume that every customer needs a very unique and highly customized SAP Change Management process, right? Well, we found the answer to that question is both yes and no. Yes, definitely every customer tends to have their own unique way of processing SAP changes. In other words, there's no single one-size-fits-all approach that works for all customers, but the types of change they process are fairly uniform and standard. And that's what we're going to cover today, what those common SAP change types look like. I know that can be a little confusing, so I wanted to quickly restate that. So what we've experienced with our customers over the past 20 or so years is that the types of SAP changes which they deal with are similar. But customers process those similar changes in many different ways. And when we started to look at this more closely, we found that 5 types of SAP changes can cover roughly 80 to 90% of all SAP changes for most organizations. This means that no matter how simple or complex your SAP environment is, improving SAP Change Management shouldn't be all that hard or intimidating. Many organizations we find have a false perception that changing their SAP change management processes will be a very difficult process from both a technical and organizational change management perspective, and that they don't really have time for it. Other projects always get in the way of that task. But if you start with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey recommends, knowing that everyone can standardize on just 5 SAP change workflows to cover 80 to 90% of situations, then the task all of a sudden doesn't look all that difficult or intimidating. So we took a look at anonymized customer data to get a better understanding of how SAP customers manage this growing volume of change that they have to deal with. We have an application called Global View, which processes a Rev-Trac diagnostics file that gives us statistics like the chart on the right over here. Just some background on our customer base. Rev-Trac's installed on more than 6,000 SAP systems, and as of our last count, there are over 70,000 Rev-Trac users that are customers. So we have a pretty good customer base, and we analyze this data over a fairly good sample size of 53 customers. And those customers span from small to large in terms of systems managed by Rev-Trac and the number of users and those types of statistics. So this pie chart on the right shows the yearly distribution for last year in 2017 for 6 different change types in use at one particular Rev-Trac customer. Of course, they're anonymous. There are actually more than 6 change types in use at this customer, even though there are only 6 slices to this pie that we're looking at. That's because this slice here in the gray, 17% other, represents maybe 5 or 10 or 15 other SAP change types that they're using that are all put together in this other category. We chose this customer because they align very closely to our averages. So the average customer, when we analyzed those 53, used 5 SAP change workflows for just over 85% of their changes, and this customer used 83, so very close. And the average customer's top 2 workflows were used for 63% of the changes, and if we add up the blue and the purple here for this customer, it's about 65, so again, pretty representative. So you can see that this customer and our average customer, the 80-20 rule or Pareto principle really applies to SAP change management. And we feel this data shows that SAP customers can effectively manage their changes with a relatively small number of SAP change processes, and that has some key advantages that we wanted to go over now. Okay, so before we get into those 5 workflows, we wanted to quickly review some of those advantages of consolidating SAP changes into that small number of options, say 5 or 6 or whatever your number might be. So when you have that small number of change workflows, it's definitely simpler for everyone involved. It's easier to initially configure, as well as the ongoing administration is a lot easier. For the end users, when they only have to choose between a few options, it's very easy for them to learn and to adopt. They're not faced with dozens and dozens of choices, and each of those choices have another dozen sub-choices, those types of things. It's really keeping it simple is a big advantage of just 5 workflows. This also leads to higher levels of adoption by the users at a much faster pace, easier onboarding when you bring new people on board. Another advantage of just focusing on 5 key change workflows is quicker project implementation and rollout times. You can really get these things going quickly if you're starting with just 5 workflows and making the majority of people use those, which really allows the organization to focus on improving their SAP change management outcomes instead of having to micromanage that process. And what we're looking at here a little bit on the right are just some statistics, again, from this Tech Validate customer survey that we've done that really shows that our customers don't have to spend a whole lot of time on Rev-Trac training, and that's really due to its intuitiveness. So I don't want to take too much time on this slide, but we came about this when we were putting together the webinar. It summarizes about a 30-year history of SAP change management with the key SAP change utilities over the years, sort of these SAP tools, the various ITIL versions, and some of the key change and development frameworks that are shown up here. These 3, Scaled Agile, DevOps, RPA, they're sort of just lumped together because they all came out about the same time, and we couldn't fit them in a different way. Of course, we all know that SAP is unique in that almost all changes start and end with an SAP transport, at least for the traditional SAP applications. And the way that SAP transports are processed hasn't really changed all that much during this 30-year period. It's still mainly using TP at the deepest level and STMS and CTS Plus for the non-ABAP stuff, and something new with HANA Application Lifecycle Manager for the native HANA changes. But most things are pretty much the same as they were when things started. But if we put aside the SAP utilities and ITIL versions and change and development frameworks for a minute, when you think about why you need to make SAP changes, there are really only a few key reasons why. For example, you might need to fix something in SAP. You might have business or organizational changes taking place that require some changes in SAP. You might be implementing new SAP functionality or rolling out to new areas or divisions, or maybe you're upgrading SAP, those types of things. By initially focusing on the why of your SAP changes instead of your how, which the how is the framework or methodology, you're going to be able to build a great foundation for managing your SAP changes, no matter which methodology or methodologies you end up using. We speak with analysts like Gartner to get their views, and more importantly, we're engaging with SAP customers every day to also get their perspectives. Just the other day, we were speaking with an SAP customer who is planning to go agile for SAP. That's great. So they've determined that they are an agile shop, but what does that really mean? We hear that a lot. Like other customers, one of their main objectives with moving to agile is to deliver SAP changes in smaller pieces, or sprints, features, whatever you might call them, at a faster pace. But what was interesting was that they said they can't be 100% agile in SAP. They'll still have some waterfall type rollout and upgrade projects, and of course they'll still have the daily, weekly break, fix, and maintenance activities, which are the changes that don't really fall into that agile development category. So agile will be part of their SAP change management process, but they'll also have other areas and types of SAP change that need to be covered. We find this is really typical for most SAP customers. And really, at the end of the day, customers need to process increasing volumes of SAP changes at a high velocity while continually improving quality in order to reduce those risks and really deliver the projects and the changes on time and on budget. The methodology you choose shouldn't matter, so long as your SAP change management solution is flexible enough to adapt to them, which Rev-Trac certainly is. In fact, Rev-Trac customers have been successfully automating SAP change control for years before many of these current methodologies were ever created or introduced. We feel that instead of obsessing with a particular framework, right, questions and meetings and workshops on should we be agile, are we a DevOps shop, or maybe scaled agile framework is the right way for us to go, you really should be concerned with and closely measuring SAP change management KPIs. Some of the ones that we think are the most important that you should take a look at is looking at improving the speed of changes moving through your systems, because of course the end users need everything yesterday, right? They don't want to wait too long. Again, we were talking to a customer just this week, and they said instead of having to wait for the next import window, he finds business users saying, I want that technology deployed as soon as it's ready to go. So long as it's been tested and signed off, I don't want to have to wait for some artificial import window a week or two ahead of time. I'd like to have it now. At the same time, the quality of those changes need to be improved by moving the testing to the left and move away from testing or fixing in production, which of course is never a good idea. Although you think about it, it's very common in the SAP world where customers have these long and expensive hypercare phases. So you certainly want to improve development and move away from that hypercare, which really means fixing it after it's gone to production. Of course, there are also always downward cost pressures which need to be managed. We have a recorded webinar from about this time last year on ways to identify your current SAP costs of change, so you can get an idea of where you are today and then measure going forward and look for improvements. There's also a quick SAP cost of change calculator on our website, and I'll give you a link to that later. And finally, there's user satisfaction, where the users are the end users or business users, and the SAP IT group are the providers that are delivering those services. I think it was Forrester that had a nice report just last year that there's a large service delivery perception gap where IT feels it's doing a great job and users feel they're doing a poor job. It was something like they interviewed the IT group across many, many different companies, and 75% of the IT group thought they were doing a good job prioritizing and delivering the changes that the business needs. But then when they asked the business, that number was 25%. So there's this like 50% gap out there. And if you can improve your change velocity and quality while making it easier for everyone to manage that SAP change, that can certainly get you on the road to help closing that gap. So Here we are at the 5 change types. What do they look like? First of all, they're not the same for everyone. We didn't say that all of our customers use the exact same 5 change types, just that 5 is that magic number which covers the lion's share of those changes. Again, after all, we know there's no single cookie cutter solution where all SAP customers can just use that single uniform process. Every SAP customer is unique, and so are their change strategies. When we look at the names of those top 5 change workflows at our customer base, the names, of course, vary widely. They make names up that make sense for them. But many times, once you understand the purpose behind the name, they can really be associated with the 5 ones here under this categorize column in this diagram, right? Emergency, low impact, normal, enhancement, and project. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Another way to look at this diagram is by cutting it in half with a horizontal line, sort of in the middle there. So you have a top half and a bottom half. What we're seeing in the SAP world is a lot of redundant tools and processes in place to manage SAP changes. That might sound familiar. It's not uncommon for organizations to be using multiple ITSM, DevOps, documentation, and Agile solutions all at once to manage their activities. ITSM tools like ServiceNow or BMC Remedy tend to exist above that horizontal line, dealing with the maintenance, break-fix changes that get classified as normal, low impact, and emergency. Below the line, organizations are tending to use Agile, DevOps, or project management tools like Jira, maybe Microsoft TFS, and custom-built solutions to manage the small and medium and even large project changes. And these solutions can and definitely do add some value and provide some standardization, assuming that other parts of IT are also using them, right? Getting everyone on the same page using the same tool sets. Another advantage is that they are certainly more modern than the SAP utilities we mentioned earlier, but a big disadvantage is that those tools don't have any visibility down to the SAP level. And of course, that's where Rev-Trac comes in with integrations to all those tools. And then if you try to integrate those solutions, let's say you want to integrate ServiceNow and Jira with your SAP change management process, and you try to do that with dozens and dozens of different types of SAP changes instead of just the 5 we're showing here, you can imagine that that effort would probably grind to a halt quickly due to the complexity, right? That's why narrowing down your choices to the top 5, as we're showing here, which can really cover more than 80% of your changes, is really important. Then you can have a much quicker implementation and better chance of success of getting all that working. So again, those 5 types can be broken into 2 sets. Again, above the line, below the line, like we were just talking about. One which covers the maintenance or break-fix aspects of SAP, and the other which covers the enhancement or larger project-based SAP changes. These names, of course, aren't universally used, so you might have some different names as opposed to the ones shown here, but the function of each change type is more important for the name. So, for example, emergency, you might not call it emergency. You might call it critical or expedited or urgent. We included some of the ITIL definitions, or the ITIL definitions for standard, normal, and emergency over here. And if you think about it, even some of those ITIL names are confusing. Their standard and normal change names, quite honestly, they sound very similar to me, but they are very different, as you can see in the definitions. So you as an organization, you'll have to come up with the names which work for you. But again, here are the 5 key categories that we see things boiling down to, where you can really cover about 80% of those changes. You have those emergencies that need to be handled quickly because of a priority production or maybe a security issue. You have low impact changes, which are low risk and can be moved through with limited governance. Normal changes are just that. They need to follow the normal change approval process as defined by your organization. And then enhancements and projects are where things get a little bit blurry, we see. You might just have small, medium, and large projects, or maybe you have a formal definition where small enhancements are planned and managed through your production support landscape, and your medium or large or maybe even quarterly projects are managed through a separate project or N+1 landscape on different systems. But no matter how you do it, these types of changes are definitely managed differently than the others. So in the next few slides, we want to step you through some examples and samples for each of these change types. Again, these are just examples, but they are based on common steps that we see over and over again with our customers. Many times, these workflows or change types will be shown in swim lane diagrams, where each step is mapped out and the person or software performing that action is shown. Swim lanes are great, and we typically deliver them as part of our consulting services, but we feel they'd be a little too in-depth for today's session. So we've tried to simplify the swim lanes into these three columns with the example process steps on the left, the automation performed by the software in the middle, and the sample approvers on the right. So just some general advice. When creating your change types, you want to focus on limiting the total number of steps. You also want to limit the number of touch points by the people that are involved. And then you want to automate with your tools as much as possible. Of course, you have to balance governance and agility, but always remember to keep things as simple as possible. So in this example of an emergency change, you'll see that there are very few steps because the objective, of course, is to get the change processed as soon as possible. There's something wrong with the production system in most cases. It's always a good idea to have a high-level manager involved in the emergency change approval process. This discourages people from trying to make every change an emergency. You'll have some basic approvals to move the change from system to system. You'll notice in this example, and even in the following ones, that we're assuming a basic development to quality to production path, but of course many of our customers have more complex paths to navigate, which is easy to handle with Rev-Trac. So the change moves through the process quickly with the software automating many of the steps. You'll notice at the beginning and at the end of the steps, there's a comment about an automatic integration with other ITSM or project management software, which is sometimes needed if those solutions are in place, like the Jira or the ServiceNow we were talking about before. One other note is that many times some required documentation that you might need for this change was skipped earlier in the steps, so you might want to capture that after the fact is noted here. We're saying potentially catch up on documentation. So that's a quick example of what a typical emergency change would look like. So this one's titled Low Impact Change. The ITIL definition is standard change, and their definition says that that is executed on a regular basis by the change management organization and has really little or no technical impact. Things such as adding a new currency or new location on SAP might be an example. I feel that the name standard is confusing, so I prefer to call it low impact, and that's what this one's titled. Again, if you look at this example, it shows very few steps, which makes sense for these types of changes. You have to keep them simple and automated, which makes it easy on the users. In this case, you also see that they're almost entirely driven by the person responsible for the change. Of course, you need at least one more set of eyes for audit and compliance purposes, but we recommend keeping this type of workflow as simple as possible. One thing to be careful with here is that you don't want users classifying other types of change as low impact. It's appealing because it's a quick way to get the change moved, but of course it's not meant for higher risk changes that need more testing and documentation. So it's a good idea to have the software automatically check if the change is really a low impact change based on the contents of that, what's inside those transports, in this case for SAP. So having this quick and simple type of workflow for low impact changes is a big win for the SAP change team. You can imagine that it drives users crazy if they find themselves going through elaborate and long change approval steps for those routine, repeatable changes. So they're all in favor of this type of fast track change. Okay, moving on to a normal change. Here's a simple example. You notice that there are a couple of testing steps included here that weren't in the previous change types. Maybe that testing requires some documentation such as screenshots or links to testing applications where those test results are actually stored. In the past two slides, I didn't spend too much time on the middle column, but you'll see some of the same automated steps being performed by the software here as we did in the previous one. Things like checking for parallel development, letting everybody know if people are working on the same changes at the same time, because that can have an impact later on in the cycle. Sending the change contents to an SAP code inspection tool might be something that you want to automate. Alerting about the sequencing and maybe dependency issues about these different changes that are going on either in the same systems or even in different systems. Importing the changes, of course, is pretty basic, but retrofitting those changes if that's applicable for an N+1 type environment. Notifying users each step of the way, of course, for the approvals and import issues and all that relevant information as these things are progressing through their change process. Again, your particular steps will vary, but we feel this gives a good baseline for processing normal changes. And those normal changes typically are moved into production systems on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. Or some customers might be even going multiple times a week or perhaps even daily. Okay, so as we mentioned before, it gets a little blurry once you move from the frequent break, fix, and maintenance types of changes to the enhancement and project types of changes. Each SAP organization has to define and manage their different types of SAP projects and put those appropriate change processes in place. But again, we're just trying to provide some simple examples of a small project or an enhancement type of change here on this screen. This example looks very similar to the normal change we were just looking at, but there was some initial scoping that was completed before any development ever started. That initial scoping and even the ongoing tracking, again, might be handled in a tool like Jira. Maybe it's following an agile development process that you have in place. But the SAP steps still have to be managed carefully down at the SAP level, and these steps vary widely from customer to customer. Many manage these smaller project changes in their main production support changes, where parallel development becomes a key concern because these enhancement changes are mixed in with your break fix and low impact and emergency changes. Others manage these enhancements in separate N+1 systems, as we mentioned earlier. But in this example, we're assuming enhancements are managed in the production support system, and they're approved by the CAB, that same CAB, since they're intermixed with those emergency, low impact, and normal changes. So again, just an example. You'll probably have similar steps, but they will be a little bit different. And then here's one final example of a larger scale project change. Again, it would start with some project or sprint scoping steps, then move on to multiple testing and import steps. In this example, we showed a separate staging or pre-production system as part of the process. Maybe you have that. Perhaps you do, perhaps you don't. Then we also showed a release bundling option, which wasn't shown earlier. It certainly could be part of the other change processes, but we put it into this one just to sort of point it out. One of the key differences you'll notice in this example is the larger amount of participants that are involved compared with the others. And projects are like that, right? Lots of people involved over an extended period of time. So having a well-planned and efficient change process in place for those larger projects really helps keep everybody on track, keeps the project on time, on budget. All right, we just went through some example change processes for the 5 key change types, and of course those examples are really generic. They'll need to be adapted to fit your requirements, but hopefully they give you a clear idea of the key types and steps that many SAP customers have found relevant and effective for managing SAP change. We mentioned earlier that even though just 5 types of SAP changes is enough to cover more than 80% for all of our customers, the way that those customers process those changes can be very different. We were talking about that earlier. On the left, you can see a very basic type of normal change process, which might be used by an organization with relatively low regulation requirements. You can see there's just 7 or 8 steps. In fact, it looks similar to the earlier normal change slide that we were talking about. Then on your right is an example of a highly regulated customer, maybe a pharmaceutical company or FDA regulated company. And so they might need to include a lot more steps and documentation in their normal change. They might have 15, 17, 18 steps, whereas another customer only needs a half or a third as many. That's one of the great advantages of Rev-Trac in that it can be easily configured and adapted for any type of change process required, automating many of the steps along the way. Okay, wrapping up here. So, based on our internal customer research that we showed earlier, we found that even though SAP customers have the need to manage their SAP changes in many, many different ways, they can manage almost 90% of those changes with really just 5 processes. So they can keep things simple and manageable. When those relatively small number of processes are managed in a highly automated way, you can significantly improve your SAP change management outcomes in the areas of increased velocity, volume, and quality, while at the same time significantly reducing risk and cost. I saw this quote on the right from an SAP integrator named Bluefin Solutions and thought it really captured both the history over the past 15, 20 years and even the current situation with a lot of SAP customers. Not necessarily Rev-Trac customers, but lots of the others. And the quote talking about how the SAP ecosystem spent its time and money on people to run processes while the rest of the technology world automated them. They're just basically contrasting the people-driven processes in the SAP world with the software and automation-driven processes in the non-SAP application world. You see all those agile tools out there for the non-SAP applications that are automating a lot of these steps, but they really haven't been adopted all that frequently in the SAP world. Of course, there are many reasons for this. Maybe everything from the mission-critical nature of SAP applications to the complexities of SAP, where you needed people making these decisions in the past, to the influence of systems integrators on a customer's SAP change management process. We see that often where customers haven't changed their processes in 12 or 15 years because that's the way the initial partner set it up and that's the way they keep on doing it today. But safe to say there are very mature, proven ways to automate your SAP change management processes today. And if you focus on just 5 key types of change, as we were talking about, you can begin to quickly realize some of those substantial benefits. Okay, well, that's going to wrap up today's webinar. I want to thank you again for joining us. We didn't do demonstrations today, but we certainly, as a company, love to do them in order to show specifically how Rev-Trac works and operates and can be used in your particular environment. So please contact us to set that up if that's of interest to you. We have lots of information on our website, which is I see there's a typo there. There's no dash there. rev-trac.com. Apologize for that. Here's the link to the savings calculator that I had mentioned. It'll take you right to it. We also have a link to the events where you can find out about our Tech Ed, that cocktail hour we're hosting. We're also going to be at events in Australia and Europe in the fall. So if you're in those locations, we'd be happy to see you there. One other link I included was from Tech Validate. That's some of those statistics that I had shown earlier. And we have the results of our customer surveys out there, which showed us having a net promoter score of plus 65, which is really off the charts in terms of customer satisfaction. And if you go to this link, you'll see some of our customer success stories, some of our customer testimonials and charts to help you understand the type of value that we bring to customers. So with that, I wanted to say goodbye, thank everyone again, and hope to see you at one of these events or one of Rev-Trac's future webinars. Bye, everyone.